I cannot believe I'm saying this, but not only is the new Assassin's Creed pretty damn fun just as a game, the history on display here is astounding. For context, I've been playing these games since the very beginning, back with AC1. They got me excited about history in the first place, and I've made 4 whole videos discussing the historical realism of the recent games and the series as a whole. I have spent far too much time in my life thinking about how Assassin's Creed balances accuracy with realism, with game design, with audience excitement factor, and what that means for the historical experience they impart overall. For my reviews of AC's tours of Egypt and Greece, the answer was pretty good, but a couple caveats, and for Valhalla, that fell to so hyper-sensationalized and anachronistic that it completely buries the things they actually got right. However, to my aforementioned surprise, Assassin's Creed Mirage, set in the great city of Baghdad during the Golden Age of Islam, pretty much nails the assignment. The world of this game is rich, charming, diverse, and impressively well-sourced. To see how, let's do some history. The first thing that struck me is how excited this game is about the setting, and that starts with something as simple as the logo design. At this point in the lore, the assassins are called the Hidden Ones, and Mirage's insignia features mirrored Arabic calligraphy spelling out the hidden. That's cool as hell, but more than a cute little visual flair or Easter egg, this shows a level of care and enthusiasm for Islamic art and culture that was distinctly absent from Ubisoft's first take on the setting in the original Assassin's Creed. And there are plenty of comparisons to be made between how Mirage handles its historical material versus how prior games did it, but for the purpose of this video, I'll be abundantly generous to the older games and just discuss Mirage on its own terms. And that brings us to the city. Mirage throws back to older AC games by focusing entirely on one urban environment, specifically the great Abbasid capital of Baghdad. It was purpose-built by Caliph al-Mansur in 762, shortly after founding their new imperial dynasty, so it's just shy of a century old when our hero Basim gets all stabby in 861. Baghdad was originally planned and built as a round city, but it very quickly grew beyond the scope of the round walls, so by the 800s, Baghdad had neighborhoods on every side and even on the far bank of the Tigris River. Mirage sadly does not provide us with East Tigris content, which is a shame, as there were at least 3 bridges across the river in this period, and even the game's collectible map knows better than to commit East Tigris erasure. I joke, but I'm honestly not too fussed about it, because unlike basically every other setting Assassin's Creed has ever tackled, recreating Baghdad is made more complicated by the city being completely lost. In 1258, it was sacked and flattened by the Mongols, so textual and cartographic records are the only thing we have to go by. Lacking nearly any surviving architecture from the city in the period, the team at Ubisoft had to get a little creative, but their vision of Baghdad is well informed by contemporary cities elsewhere in the Islamic world, as well as other surviving Abbasid works in places like Samarra. It's a kind of guesswork, but it's grounded in the sources that we do have, and this allows for a little bit of leeway in what exactly gets placed where. For instance, the legendary Bayt al-Hekmah, the House of Wisdom, was originally the Caliph's personal library in the late 700s before opening up into a public scholarly institution, so it probably would have been in the round city near the palace, but here in Mirage, it's outside the round walls in the Abbasiyah district, with the intent being that every district has its own feel. Abbasiyah gets characterized as the scholars district, while Harbiyah is the industrial district with the big prison, and Karkh is the merchants district with the main bazaar. And of course, the utterly palatial round city is the administrative center of Baghdad. Outside lies the wilderness with barren sands, lush farmlands, oases, settlements, Kadwansarai way stations, and a whole ass ziggurat. The distribution of districts and landmarks in and around Baghdad is rather gamey, but it makes sense, and again, when the city's lost, we can't strictly call it wrong. There are a handful of similar things that are incorrect or anachronistic, but never dip into being dishonest and pretending that one thing is actually something else entirely. For instance, AC Valhalla using Christian stave churches from the 1200s to depict Norse pagan temples in the 800s is incorrect, anachronistic, and dishonest, smushing time, aesthetics, and 2 entirely separate religions into one messy representation. Thankfully, nothing in Mirage is ever that flagrant, but one design choice does warrant discussion, namely how this imperial capital of Baghdad acts as a microcosm of the entire medieval Islamic world. We see that in people, languages, and goods coming from all over, but this also comes through in the world of the city itself, which features some fundamentally impossible inclusions, like West African minarets, Iberian tilework, Iranian mosques, bazaars, and rugs, Central Asian tombs, some pretty Taj Mahal-ish looking domes, and several disparate architectural influences on the House of Wisdom. Of course, Baghdad is famously lost, so we can't bring the contradicting evidence to say J'accuse, but we can be pretty confident that these elements didn't show up until a good ways later and not in Baghdad. On paper, these kinds of inclusions are inaccurate and contribute to the sense of a timeless Uchronia, but are they dishonest? Depends on the intent and the effect on the player. Lead historian Raphael Whelan described it as filling in the blanks, reaching out laterally to other corners of the Islamic world to create a believable composite picture. And just looking metatextually, Mirage is basically the one chance for a mega-budget game to showcase Muslim culture at this scale and fidelity, so it gives a fire hose blast of cultural riches from Iberia, Africa, Iraq, Persia, and Central Asia, with the understanding that if they don't get their spotlight here, it may never happen. So yeah, it's inaccurate, but we'll see in a minute how this game is far more poetic and folkloric than strictly historical, so assembling elements from across Islam into one city captures the feeling of Baghdad as the capital of that world. Mirage does not show how Baghdad looked, but what Baghdad meant, and I have to respect that choice. Additionally, religion in this game is handled surprisingly well. Nothing revolutionary, but it avoids the constant nasty attitude this series has had towards religion since the edgy enlightened atheist days of AC1. Here in Mirage, we see mosques all over the city, accompanied by fountains and lush gardens. We hear the call to prayer during the day, and points of interest like the Nestorian Christian monastery up north show the diversity of religious life within the Abbasid world. There's a real love for the variety of people who called the city home during the Golden Age, and we can actually hear that in the various languages spoken by background characters. In addition to Arabic, there's Persian, Chinese, Hebrew, and Greek. When we're looking at the people in the game and the worlds they inhabit, there's genuinely so much to appreciate about this depiction of Baghdad. The plot, however, stumbles a bit. The game takes place during the anarchy at Samarra, a real historical crisis following the death of Caliph al-Mutawakkil, with the ensuing factional rivalries causing a massive long-term impact on the Abbasid Caliphate. The concept in the lead-in is pretty cool, but the game only vaguely gestures at the political factions at play and what's happening in the city as a result. On paper, there's a strong case to be made for Basim feeling guilty about the current state of affairs, but the story does not engage with that, and it feels like the dastardly Order of the Ancients was already in control of everything anyway. Overall, the political history here is definitely the weakest link. For instance, the first assassination sequence in Harbiyah has a whole plotline about freeing the rebel leader Ali of the Zanj Rebellion, yet does not at any point show what even the basic idea of the revolution is. It was an uprising of enslaved East Africans, called Zanj in Arabic, seeking to end their oppression and enslavement in the Caliphate and toppling what they viewed as the oppressive authority of the Caliph. But the game does not engage with that premise at all. A huge wasted opportunity. Strictly speaking, the rebellion didn't start for another 8 years, but that's such a small time gap, I fully do not care. I'm more disappointed that they went through the effort to include the Zanj and yet not examine it. The first major arc of the game feels like, oh my god, the Caliph is dead and everything's in crisis, but the player thinks, really? Feels like the Order is only slightly more in control than they were already. And the game says, anyway, go kill the slaver Al Ghul. Then the game says, here's the leader of the Zanj Rebellion, and the player thinks, what is the Zanj Rebellion? And the game says, anyway, go kill Al Ghul. It's a letdown. But while the plot never sticks the landing, which is absolutely what I was bracing for in the lead up to this game, the overall tone is actually quite clever in a really surprising way. Mirage is a very bookish game, taking heavy influence from Arabic and Persian poetry and folklore. It can be hard to see if you're not looking for it, but the ways the characters talk to each other, greet each other, pray for each other even, it's very steeped in the Islamic literature of the period. In stories like 1001 Nights, characters who reunite after a long absence will stop dead in their tracks to recite prayers and poetry for 50 lines at least. Early in Mirage, Basim has a reunion that nods towards this tradition in a way that doesn't shatter the pacing. Basim's story overall flows more like a folktale than a grounded history, and this is more or less in line with how the last few games have handled their narratives. So while the historical, let's call it nutritional value, is lacking from the story in Mirage, the literary flavor is at least there. I'll be less generous to Basim's outfits and weapons, as those are your typical exaggerated video game fare. It doesn't fall victim to all-out Orientalism, but it gets pretty damn goofy in a couple places. There's the indication of actual medieval weapons and costumes under there, but they're clearly playing it up for the aesthetic, and by this point, I know better than to die on that hill. By contrast, most if not all of the lootable inventory items are actual museum pieces, with extra written descriptions for the lost books and artifact quest items. They didn't need to do that, but it shows how wide-reaching the Islamic world truly was, so I'm super glad they did. Similarly, the game's codex entries are frankly fantastic. Rather than exclusively talking about places and people like previous games' database entries, these cover a huge range of topics in society, art, culture, and daily life. They're cleverly written with publication-quality images because most of them are literally sourced from museums, and as the game's main collectibles scattered across points of interest on the map, they're genuinely fun to track down. I liked the discovery tours from Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, but these codex entries are in the main game and lightweight enough that casual players will actually engage with them. Video game and Donkey actually enjoyed reading them, so Baghdad acts as a compelling playable museum. That was always the goal with these games, but with an overwhelming volume of historical resources so lovingly shown in the game, Mirage finally lands it. So where does all of that leave us? At its heart, this depiction is still fundamentally a game and not an educational exhibit, but it's made with an enthusiasm and care that I genuinely did not think possible in a mass-market video game from Ubisoft. But here I am, surprised and damn impressed. This isn't a game about what was happening to the Abbasid Caliphate in 861, this is a game about Baghdad in the golden age of Islam, and in that, it succeeds. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to thank our buddy Adam, aka Ludo History, for his help with this video. I had the pleasure of guesting on some of his Twitch live streams as he played through Mirage, and as a fellow long-suffering Assassin's Creed fan, we've had some lengthy discussions about this game. I'm appreciative of his knowledge and his kindness in checking over my script for this video. Now, if you don't mind, I have to go back to being in shock that I actually like this game.